Really is the degree to which like almost any prop matters in this play.
Oh, I know. Welcome back, everybody, to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob, that's Jackson. We're delighted to have you back today. We're delighted to be today talking about one of the greats, let's say, the big G greats.
Yes, absolutely. Today we're talking about LeBlanc by Lorraine Hansberry. Boy, what a play, what a powerhouse! A great chance to return to Hansberry, as I believe we've done a play of hers before, right? If memory serves correctly.
Yes, we have talked about Raisin in the Sun on the podcast already. Raisin in the Sun, of course, being sort of her magnum opus, her great piece, the thing she is best known for. But she has quite a bit of other writing out there, including a lot of writing under a pseudonym, a lot of more radical writing than was widely more accepted on Broadway at the time. And then we have this play, LeBlanc, which, stealing from my own context section later, Lorraine Hansberry said famously was her most important piece of writing ever. And that makes it incredible fodder for discussion. And it also has made it, throughout history, a hugely controversial piece of work for a whole variety of reasons that come down to all kinds of cultural and social and racial politics that were weaving around this play during its original writing and production, and still carry on that legacy of controversy and just really differing opinions on the piece. As it's had this, it's a rarely produced play, so it's not like it has this huge body of people having seen it and determined for themselves. So it's going to be fun to talk about, because the gap in people's opinions and interpretations of this play is so wide.
Yeah, absolutely, and well earned. It definitely like delves into really deep things, really important things, really big socioeconomic things, really big themes around racism, around classism, around all of these things. So yeah, that's definitely a play with robust reactions, appropriately so. So excited to have the chance to talk about it. Excited also, though, to continue to kind of, as we often do in pieces like this, where we acknowledge kind of our perspective and where we're coming from and talking from this piece. We also would love to be a place that continues to spread connection to other places to continue to engage in the conversation around this play. So even before we jump into the conversation, wanted to just say, be sure to check out below in the description down below of this podcast, and you'll find links to a variety of other conversations and sources. Definitely look around, because there are a lot of great conversations about this play and all that it is speaking to be found, and we'll be sure that you get a couple of those links below.
Yeah, our perspective is necessarily limited, and it comes from a sort of particular vantage point. And so we want to encourage, and one of the great things about No Script the podcast is being able to have a wide variety of discussions. And we hope those discussions are happening amongst you all out there. We're going to have a discussion today because LeBlanc is an awesome play, and it's worth talking about in whatever small degree we're able to highlight plays of coming from a multitude of voices. We want to do that, but I echo what you said, Jackson. In the episode notes, check out some other conversations that we'll share about this play as well. Another big announcement, though, relating not to this episode, but to the upcoming series of episodes. It is time again for our themed month. We are in season 12 of this show, which seems incredible. And we've done 11 other themed months of a wide variety of kinds. We like to spend 4 episodes every season, really focusing our conversation around scripts that share something in common, which is kind of in opposition to our general view you of trying to be widely different episode to episode. We get this chance to look at plays that share some things, including in the past, share a playwright, share an era of history, share some sort of thematic element, share the fact that there's murder in them, share the last season we talked about plays that all are set around the winter holiday season. So we do a lot of different kinds. One that we keep coming back to, though, because the fountain is so rich, is short plays. We've done 2 installations of our mini month where we look at not full-length pieces of work, but short plays. And we're sort of back to that because of how many great scripts there are to have conversations around. This time, however, we're not just looking at short plays, we're looking at really short plays. We will be talking about 4 10-minute plays in what we're calling mini months.
Yeah, mini month, super mini month. Where, yeah, chatting about these plays. I'm really excited for this conversation because the 5-minute play structure has been some of the most fun I've had directing. I've had deeply meaningful. I feel like the percentage of meaningful productions I've had are more reside in the full length play or even 1-act play sort of zone. But as far as like the most fun that I've had, the most like interesting big choices that I've made as a director, the 5-minute play is like a great source for that. And I have a lot of fond memories of doing very short plays, both as a director and as an actor. So I'm excited to have the chance to kind of turn our lens towards that style of play for pretty much the first time on the podcast, because we don't tend to talk about that short of a play and the sort of impact that it has all that often at all.
Yeah, the 10-minute play format, of course, made really famous, not maybe invented, but made famous by the Actors Theater of Louisville. And so a lot of the 10-minute plays that we'll be discussing, just to try to get a level of widespreadness that there might be a chance that you have access to a copy of one of these scripts. Well, a lot of these plays will be coming out of the various play development programs that have occurred throughout history at the Actors Theater of Louisville. 10-minute plays are beautiful for their simplicity, their impact, their completion of a single action, the way that they twist expectations. There'll be a lot of time for us to discuss a very short number of pages. I think it'll be really, really different. It should be a lot of fun. And of course, I will bridge the gap to Jackson's next section of the podcast. If you're a patron of the show, you already know the themed month. This is not a surprise or an announcement to you because you have that benefit.
It's true. And if you are not a patron of the show, just think you missed out on that for a whole month or whatever it's been. No, thank you.
It has not been a month.
It's been a couple weeks for sure. A little bit of advance notice. But yes, thank you all to all of you patrons who are patrons of the show and are over at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. Y'all are awesome. This show could not exist without you. We love getting to have these conversations, talk about these scripts, talk about themed months and things like that. And y'all at Patreon make it possible for us. If you're looking for a way to help out the show, if you're liking what you're hearing, if you've tuned in for a couple episodes, or if you're just jumping in and looking for a way to kind of get involved a little bit more, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast is the way to go. You can find us over there. We've got a number of different things, including early access to the scripts that we're doing, a number of different tiers of patronship that you can explore over there. And we'd love to hang out with you over there and kind of cultivate that community and your connection to that community over there. So thank you once again to all of our patrons. And if you are looking for a way to help out the show, get involved in the No Script community a little bit more, you can head on over to patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. We'll see you over there.
And now back to the script.
All right, here we go.
Okay, the context of LeBlanc is complicated. It's rooted in the politics of America. It's rooted in one of the most famous playwrights in America ever, Lorraine Hansberry. And so it's necessarily hard to tell. But what I want to say to start out with is that the story of LeBlanc coming into being is, to me, part of the play in a really crucial way, in a way in which the context for other plays is not always a part of the story in such a way. how it happened, so the story goes as I understand it, and I'm certainly not a Lorraine Hansberry historian, but this is what I gather, is that Lorraine Hansberry had been interested throughout a lot of her life, and you see this in a lot of her work. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody that knows anything about Lorraine Hansberry. Had been very interested in Africa, in African independence movements. She had been taking, prior to the creation of this play, sort of a year-long seminar on African culture and history, and had written some research papers, and so was interested in what was getting towards the later part of her career in writing a play set in Africa. This is the only play that she had ever wrote set in Africa. But those themes of African countries claiming independence against colonialism, those are of course present throughout her body of work. And if the only thing you know is Raisin in the Sun, then you know it from Raisin in the Sun, in which characters parade on in traditional African dress, in which one of the characters, an immigrant from Africa, claims, supports, vocally advocates for African freedom. Imagine that on Broadway in like the 50s. I mean, we're talking about shocking stuff from somebody who goes on to become a household name in America. And so she's interested. She's doing this research. She's part of this experience, and she starts to think about writing this play set in Africa, and starts to stretch to set in place the sort of bones. She has this idea of someone who had come from an African country and had been living in Europe, returning to their home country for their father's funeral. This sort of sketchy idea begins to be set in place, and then Lorraine Hansberry sees another play, a play by a French playwright named Jean Genet, who he wrote a play called Les Nègres, or The Blacks, basically. And this play it is a complicated play because while it has this incredibly sort of simplistic, paternalistic view of Africa, really was not set out to be a play that enforced white superiority over black people or anything like that. In some ways, it's a fairly progressive play for its time, but it did have this view of Africans as this sort of exotic outsider, even as the playwright was not really intending to paint a negative view of African people or superior view or anything like that. Nonetheless, Lorraine Hansberry comes away from seeing this play and says, this play does not at all fairly or realistically or humanistically portray African people. And so her idea for LeBlanc gets much more crystallized, and you can actually see the title of LeBlanc, which is strange if you know the play or have read the play, because the title is, of course, French, but the play is about British colonizers in Africa. It really has nothing to do with French or French people at all. But the title comes from this being a response to Jean Genet's play. She starts writing it sometime around 1960, so is the tale told by her partner. And it's about the same time there she sees this play and starts sort of writing it in more specific. She goes working on this play for many, many, many years. In 1963, you get the first public version of any part of the script, which was a performance, a sort of workshop on what basically amounts to Act 1, Scene 3 of LeBlanc, which is an incredibly powerful scene. I'm sure we'll get to our conversations about different parts of the play as we go, so I won't say that now. But this was staged at the Actors Studio Writers Workshop. And as Lorraine Hansberry's partner recounts, he says that he was told that this ends up being one of the most extraordinary, famous sessions of this writer's workshop in its history, for the power of this play, for the voice in this play. She spends years working on it because she still feels, even at that point, that this is not the idea in its final form, that the play needs quite a bit more work to work. In fact, as the story is told, she takes the play, she takes her typewriter, she takes journals, she takes all of the pieces of writing that she's doing around this play with her in and out of the hospital as her health begins to decline near the end of her life. Of course, Lorraine Hansberry dies then in the middle of the 60s, very, very early in 1965. Famously, only about a month later, Malcolm X is assassinated. A couple of years go by, and Lorraine Hansberry's partner, Robert Niemeroff, he puts together all of the various drafts of the scripts, the scenes, all the stuff that Lorraine Hansberry has of this play. He sort of weaves it together. He does a little bit of extra writing around what he claims are very specific notes from her about how this play was going to go. And then he takes it to Broadway and mounts a posthumous debut on Broadway in 1970 at the Longacre Theater. The play gets let's call them mixed reviews. So much so that in the version of the play that I have access to, there is a long essay by Robert Nemiroff after the play in which he goes through in detail. I would describe it as bafflement. I don't know that he would describe it that way, but it's sort of bafflement at how widely varied the reviews of the script are, to the point where he'll have one passage from one reviewer which will say something to the effect of, the characters in this play are sketches at best, stereotypes at worst. I'm not reading, I'm sort of summarizing. They're not fully fleshed out. They're not very interesting people. They're not very human. And then he'll quote a different reviewer on the very next page who will say, these are the most interesting human characters I've ever seen on stage in all my life. Lorraine Hansberry's genius shines through every word. So there's this huge gulf in the critical response to the play. Now, interestingly, the huge gulf is sort of part of what keeps it alive. This interest in how differently people see it. Robert Nemiroff in this essay describes how for a play that's not a musical, especially a drama that's not a musical, i.e. not a comedy, the New York Times, getting a bad review from the New York Times is a death knell. And that's still to some degree true today. And this play got a bad review from the reviewer of the New York Times. But then interestingly, like a month later, the New York Times reviewer published a sort of follow-up in which he said something to the effect of, now, I know I didn't like it, but there sure are a lot of people out there who seem to like it. And for what it's worth, I hope it keeps running on Broadway because it seems like it's a really important play. So there's this push and pull throughout American politics and theater response, theater criticism about this script. So that kind of keeps it alive tenuously on Broadway for a while. Eventually, however, the taxi strike is what ends up kind of closing it down. That Broadway production featured the great James Earl Jones in the central role of Djembe. It was nominated for 2 Tonys. James Earl Jones goes on to win a Drama Desk Award for it. And then, as I said earlier, it's kind of a rarely produced piece, so I'll just highlight a couple of places where this show has gone on to be, including the most famous revival. But there's not a lot of productions of this script. In part, it's just incredibly complicated to produce, and it, as is true of Lorraine Hansberry's a lot of her work, it's a little long. The 2007 Stanford Summer Theater did a revival, and then the most famous revival was 2016 at the National Theater. They actually did some rewriting and editing of the script because it is, of course, in some ways, it is an unfinished play. And that's, again, the critical response varies widely, as to the point of being like, this play really needs a lot of work. It's totally unfinished. Clearly, she never did it. And then you get a bunch of people who are like, this is her best work ever. It's a perfectly complete play and is untouchable. So huge gap in that understanding. So National Theater 2016 does it. They actually filmed that production, and then during COVID, they streamed it only for like a week. And as far as I can tell, it's not available on their National Theater at Home platform to watch. So they've put it kind of back under wraps after revealing it. And so actually a lot of the reviews of the play are from during COVID. As theater reviewers were struggling to find what to write about, they reviewed this production of LeBlanc from 2016. 2017, a company called Rogue Machine produced it at the Met in Los Angeles. That run got extended by a long while due to the incredible rave reviews and audience response. Educational theater tends to do it a while, places like Sacramento State in 2018. And then what I think is a really cool production, kind of an interesting found space sort of deal in Philadelphia this past fall of 2023 by a company called Egopo Classic Theater. I've looked up their mission statement, and they're kind of interested in re-envisioning what they call the classics and also including more voices in that classic canon. So, I mean, this play, for who Lorraine Hansberry is, for what it talks about, its context is part of its story and its life. And that's at least a little taste of it.
Yeah. I definitely recommend getting this particular version of the script that we both got because it has like so much in it. It's LeBlanc and the Collected Last Plays of Lorraine Hansberry. It's a great book. It has lots of great context. So if you're looking, this is another of those instances where like if you're looking for more context than we're giving you necessarily, it's a great book. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I'm gonna give you a little bit of synopsis on this particular script. We're gonna be flying by on it because there's lots to get into. Excited to get into all of the details of the script, but I'm just gonna give you a brief context to start with. This play takes place in the fictional but still very real and truthful nation of Zatembe. This nation is sort of a fictional nation that Lorraine Hansberry has chosen to write about, and kind of set the play in for us to engage the themes that she's bringing out. And it's kind of a stranger comes to town, and then a bunch of familiar people come to town as well. It's an interesting sort of structure in that way. It's set in the 1970s or maybe the late 60s. At least initially, I think she was writing it for now when she wrote it. The play is about this town, this small town, and the kind of stranger who comes to town is Morris. Morris comes to town. He's this journalist coming to write a story about this particular mission that has been planted here and the various peoples around it. So the mission is like a Protestant mission, and he's there to kind of interview people and write a piece, maybe even write a book, and kind of get the story on what's going on here. We meet a number of people who are at the mission. One of the first people we meet are Dr. Marta, and then she's kind of the one of the main doctors who is kind of facilitating care in the area. We meet Dr. Willie DeCoven, and he's facilitating care as well. We continue to meet more characters begin to stop by. Also, we meet Madame Nielsen, who is the wife of Mr. Nielsen, and Mr. Nielsen is the person who runs the mission. He's the person who kind of planted it with Madame Nielsen, and they've been there for the longest, a very long time, 20 years or something like that. Longer, I think. Now that I say that, I think it's like 40 years that they've been there. So he's there to kind of interview them specifically, but notably, Mr. Nielsen is not there. Mr. Nielsen has left, as the characters that he meets say he often does. But he's kind of gone across the river to kind of travel in the region and do his missionary work throughout the region there. And they're not sure when he's coming back, but he'll be back soon. So Morris goes about preparing his piece and interviewing various people, trying to get as much out of them as he can. And one of the people who talks with a bunch is Madame Nielsen. So that's kind of going on at the mission. Also returning to town is one of the people who is from this place. Chembe returns to town, and he meets up with his half brother, who is Eric. More on that later in our conversation. As he returns, Eric is there, and he kind of catches up on what's going on with Eric. He's a little bit like tipsy / drinking when he arrives, so he's trying to figure out why his kind of younger brother Eric is this way. But then his older brother Abios returns to town as well, and it starts to come out that they're returning back because their father, who is also named Abios, has just died, and so they're kind of returning to pay respects to him. And they've all been pretty far afield. Chembe has kind of had he left town and began to kind of work his way through or out of town, and then eventually like traveled quite broadly and has gotten quite a bit of European education and lives in London now, married someone from London, and is now like far afield returning home. While Abios has been sort of a little bit more far afield religiously. He is closer in region, but as he reveals kind of slowly and he tries to hide for a little while, he is kind of he has become very close to being a priest in the Catholic Church in the nation of Zatembe. So you have these brothers kind of colliding and coming back to town for the first time, and these brothers are all pretty integrally tied to the mission. Their father worked friendly with the mission for a long time until he couldn't anymore, as we find out later in the play. But they grew up at the mission, and so Chembe goes to the mission and greets Madame Nielsen, and there's this kind of connection between them. And eventually Morris begins to interview Chembe as well, and he wants to kind of get his side of the story, and he kind of leans into that. The last character that emerges as sort of a nettle in the side of almost all of these characters, almost universally, is Major George Rice. And Major George Rice is in charge of the kind of regiment in the area. He's in charge of the sort of quote unquote law and order. And he shows up at the mission and kind of inserts himself into a lot of conversations. He's trying to control things. But he also brings the news that there's been some reports of violence going on, that white families are being killed, and as he is the white law and order person, that's what he's talking about, and so he's kind of locking things down and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. The other character of note that we've met pretty much right away at the first scene, who greets Morris originally, is Peter, and Peter is kind of, he helps around the mission quite a bit. And he is kind of closely connected into Eric and Abios and Chembe's family. More on him later, though. The end of the first act is one of, I think, 3 or 4 kind of debates that happen. There's these big debates in this play between Chembe and Morris that are kind of disguised as earnest conversations, but turn into interview/debates. And the two of them begin to talk quite a bit about this tension, this racial tension that is felt. I forgot to say Morris is American, white American. Chembe is black and native to Zatembe, and so they have this conversation with each other that is based in a lot of philosophy, a lot of socioeconomic structure, a lot of like naming oppression, and Morris plays the part of like this sort of like, you know, woke for 1970s white person trying to display that he is woke, and trying to get to the bottom of it, of this stuff, and Chembe is kind of illuminating his ruse for him, as well as like showing him a lot more of what's going on. So there's a number of those back and forths that sort of ends the first act. You also kind of have this presence of drums that cues a lot of actions. The end of the first act ends with these drums emerging again, Chembe hearing them and reacting to this sort of this maybe spirit, maybe vision, maybe ghost, maybe something of this woman who appears to him. She appears in the prologue as well, and at the ending of the play, with this kind of spirit presence calling him to the drums and to what is happening at the drums, which we find out in Act 2 was a meeting of the council of the town. Because there's more to these rumors of violence, there is in fact an uprising beginning in the neighborhood, and it all has to do with there's an individual named Amos Kumalo, who is a statesman who's coming back to the nation. He's been away for a long time, but he's trying to come back to try to negotiate power back to the people of Zatembe, even as the kind of occupying oppressors are resistant to what's going on. So there's more and more talks of violence emerging, and what eventually happens is Chembe is invited into that group. Peter, who I've talked about before, kind of comes and asks him to join. He discovers that Chembe discovers that his father, Abios, was an integral member, in fact, started this sort of resistance. We find out later in the play that Abios tried to like do have a route through some parliamentary options, brought it to Dr. Nielsen all these years ago, and Dr. Nielsen sort of like squashed it, got rid of it quickly, and so that was the last time that Chembe's father ever went to the mission. And so for the rest of Act 2, to sum up what is a very intricate struggle, Chembe tries to navigate which way he's going to go on this issue, whether he's going to go home to London or stay here and try to help in this movement. All of that is woven in with the difficulty of his older brother Abios being a part of the Catholic Church and wanting to be a part of the kind of state of Zatembe, which is trying to stop this violence in whatever way possible. And so you have their two combating worldviews, all the while he and Morris are combating worldviews, all the while we learn more about Eric and some of his past and how he is in fact the child of Major George Rice and their mother, and the way that the mission kind of covered that up. All of these things start to come to light. I'm gonna nerd out about how we get slow reveals all throughout this play because it really is awesome. But to sum it all up to the very end, we have this illumination that happens where Abios finds out that Peter is the one under or behind all of the kind of rebellion in the area. And there's this moment where Chembe has to decide whether he's going to stop Abios and essentially have to kill him to stop him from going to the major to report this. And he can't. He doesn't. He lets him go. And so Abios goes and reports Peter. The major, of course, shows up with force and kills Peter in front of Chembe and in front of Abios, in front of the whole mission. And what then follows is this slow realization by Chembe that he can't not stay here. Again, very slow, very drawn out, complicated character beats for him, all mixed into his conversations with Morris and Madame Nielsen. The kind of last revelation that we get in that same scene is that Mr. Nielsen or Dr. Nielsen is never coming back because he was one of the people attacked and killed. And so the whole mission kind of goes into mourning. One by one, people start to leave. Eventually, it's just Madame Nielsen left, kind of mourning her husband there. And this final scene plays out between Chembe and Madame Nielsen, where she says, "Your country needs you. We need you here. This nation that has kind of become my nation needs you to help it." And he makes the choice to stay. Abios shows up and tries to say, we mourn your husband, etc. And then Chembe emerges, kind of wearing ceremonial clothing, and reverses the mercy that he allowed earlier on in the play, kills Abios for his betrayal, and kind of kicks off the uprising, which, by the way, is not the uprising, because there has already been, Major Price has already kind of unleashed the dogs. There's helicopters flying over for the last like 3 scenes of the play. It's clear that there's been a military response to the killing of Dr. Nielsen. And so Chembe decides to stay and be a part of leading the resistance to that response. So it ends with one more emergence of this woman, this sort of like warrior spirit of Zatembe that shows up, and that's my flyby attempt at a synopsis of this play. Excited to kind of get into some of the intricate moments of it as well.
Boy, yeah, there's just, it's such a brilliant piece of writing, and it's so moving even to read. The way that Lorraine Hansberry has managed to put real stakes, real things that are motivating these characters into, or maybe behind is a better word, these really weighty conversations about sort of the nature of our relationships with each other. I mean, those reviews out there that are negative and that feel like the play is unfinished and is sort of a skeleton call it a little bit didactic. That character spent a lot of the play talking about these weighty philosophical ideas. And to them, I think the response that I give is, but the weighty philosophicals that they're debating are brought to concrete reality in the play. That the things that they're saying to each other matter intensely. The Act 1, Scene 3, which was again that first scene that was performed at the Actors Studio Workshop in New York to such great acclaim, is the first scene between Morris, the reporter from America, and Chembe, and it is, I think, a masterfully crafted interaction as Morris tries to show, essentially, I'm not one of those white racists. I really do care about what's going on here. I really want to get to know you. And Chembe shows over and over the ways in which their relationship is more and more and more complicated by the world around them. There's a great, I want to read just a couple of lines to show a way that she does that. Charlie, who is Morris, he's trying to get Djembe to sit down and have a drink, have a sort of an on the record conversation in advance of the article or maybe the book someday. He says, "I'm sure. How about that drink?" Djembe says, "I think you heard. There is a curfew here for natives." Charlie says, "I don't think either one of us cares one hell of a lot about that curfew. Besides, you are indoors technically. They're on this veranda, this sort of covered porch, right?" And Djembe says, "Men here die on account of such technicalities." That kind of powerful interactions between characters who are sometimes trying to understand each other and sometimes just trying to be heard in some way is what defines this play. And some of the scenes are just breathtaking confrontations.
Yeah, but then so both breathtaking, like really deep a critique of each other and attempts to connect, also full of these like a delightful noticings that keep happening, like Djembe over and over, especially the initial moments, despite his probably correct assessment of Charlie Morris that he's sort of doesn't have the whole picture and doesn't know that he doesn't have the whole picture. He's kind of won over by the like abrasive Americanness of him and his ability to kind of like continue brazenly having this conversation anyway. The two of them have this like really interesting conflict based way to get to know each other. And it kind of continues to lead to more and more connection. I don't feel like really any of the scenes end in a true sort of like warm moment between them. And yet there is this like respect that builds between them, where to the very end, at the very end, their sort of last interaction is one that is laced with respect. But it's just interesting that they arrive there by so much confrontation, which is just a great way to show this debate between them throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, and the combat is not it. Charlie Morris says over and over, the reporter says over and over, basically, we're on the same side. We're on the same, it's sort of his repeated mantra throughout. You know, I want to see, this is, I'm sort of speaking on behalf of Morris, I guess. I want to see Africa uplifted too. I'm with you, right? And Djembe shows him over and over again that no matter what you mean by that, it is very hard for that to be true. It is very hard for that to be reality. And that is what this play does so powerfully, is present the incredible complication that surrounds these issues. Now, we're talking back when the play is written in the 60s and first performed in the 70s. Race relations, of course, are in a very different place than they're in now. But the play still has so much of the power of in just being brazen about the complexity. I feel like in this play, there is never an easy answer given, not one time in the whole script. And that's very difficult to accomplish, because what it means is that a lot of this play is very unsatisfying. It does not offer you the thing that the sports movie about integrating black and white players onto the same team offers you at the end. You know,
right.
You just don't get that from this play. It is, I mean, in that way that Lorraine Hansberry, that keen eye that she has, she just gives you scene after scene of, look at all of this. Look at it again. There's no easy way to escape this.
Yeah, no uncomplicated way out or way to resolve. Each of the characters, the three sort of characters who come back to town or come to town for the first time. So you got Charlie Morris, the reporter. You have Djembe, and you have Abios. All of them are returning to town or getting to town with assumptions. You have Charlie arriving with this assumption that he's going to kind of have a bunch of interactions with people, get a great story, and maybe get to champion a cause that he sort of believes in. You have Djembe returning to town and wanting to mourn his father, certainly, but also wanting, I think, to connect to his life back here. And like the first scene, or the first night that he is back, he goes to the funeral for his father and sort of dresses appropriately for this funeral in sort of like African traditional attire to go to it, and he wants to lean into that. Well, he discovers that there's more going on, and his assumption about what returning to that might be is different when it's played out in light of the rebellion that's going on as well. You have as well, Abios returns to town in his sort of like robed in his Catholicism, trying to kind of bring an option of change through getting into the state. And he sees a world in which he might be named a bishop of this diocese in some world soon. And all the work that they're doing in parliamentary circles to try to get more and more people from Zatembe into the parliament, he sees this sort of like long, slow change method, and his assumptions about how that's going to be received are necessarily don't go the way that he was planning to. So there's all of these assumptions that people have are brought to light slowly through a process of sometimes really interesting conversation, other times really painful choices that slowly reveal that, well, perhaps what we assumed what we were getting into when we came back here is not in fact going to be the case.
For sure, right? Yeah, I think 100%. And all of those different sort of ideas and objectives and backstories and sort of weights that the characters bring. I mean, one of the things that's sort of how the story is structured is that you have all these people sort of coming back to this place for this funeral. Or in Morris' case, it's not for the funeral. It ends up being sort of a coincidence that he's there when this is happening. So all these people are drawn together at this little mission. And in a similar way, if for those of you out there that are more familiar with Raisin in the Sun, to the way that the characters in Raisin in the Sun are a really sort of diverse batch of political, social, liberation, all these different sort of viewpoints on society, these characters share a little bit of that too. You have these sort of differing outlooks on colonialism in Africa or on race relations, and it's each character does in some way sort of represent a diverse viewpoint on that. But what ends up happening, I want to read a quote here from the introduction to this book because I think it really characterizes what she does so well. This is a quote from Julius Lester, who wrote the introduction. Julius Lester, an incredible black writer in his own right. And he's describing LeBlanc, and he's describing how Lorraine Hansberry was so gifted at taking these social, political, economic, theoretical ideas and attaching real human meaning to them. And so he says, it's a masterful play. He's talking about LeBlanc. It is a masterful play, an almost pure distillation of Lorraine Hansberry's personal political philosophy. My God, how we need her today. She knew that politics was not ideology, but caring. Politics is that quality of becoming more and more human, of persuading, cajoling, begging, and loving others to get them to go with you on that journey to be human, and defending yourself against those who seek to prevent that journey. That caring human lens is, I mean, it's what makes Walter in A Raisin in the Sun such a sympathetic figure, right? He talks about how he sees his future stretched out in front of him and sees an empty space. It's so masterfully brought to bear with these characters who what they bring to the table in a lot of the scenes is differing political, social philosophies. And they put them in competition with each other. But it's not like it's a philosophical dialogue like the old textbooks you might have read in your college philosophy class, because they're real fleshed out humans that care about things, that are hurt by the real conditions of the things that they're arguing for or put into competition with. And it's what makes this sort of play of pulling together this sort of diverse group of folks and sort of seeing how you can rearrange them. It's what makes it so powerful and moving and suspenseful is that there's real things, terrible things and great things happening to these characters in each of these scenes in and amidst the debates and the dialogue.
Yeah. There's so many of the characters do witness that happening and try to grapple with the consequences of it. I feel like Madame Nielsen is one of the big characters that discussion happens for.
Yes.
Because she has the perspective of 40 years here. And we slowly learn more and more all that she's seen and how her maybe some of her perspective has shifted in the time that she's here. She's the one who in the end encourages Chembe to stay and fight for Zatembe. So she is the character on which a lot of this pivots, I think.
Incredible, fascinating, awesome character for so many reasons. Early in the play, Chembe, when he's first asked to take sides in this conflict, says that there are people that have seen too much to take sides. And now I'm borrowing again from Julius Lester. I don't pretend that I've invented this idea. This is an idea that he fleshes out in that essay. That Madame Nielsen is another of those people. And it's so brilliantly embodied or made into an image in the fact that Madame Nielsen is blind. She spends the whole play needing to be led around from one place to another. And so when you get her and Chembe sort of at the mourning site for Reverend Nielsen, and they have this sort of frank conversation where she also seems to be somebody that has seen too much to take sides and has an incredible, it seems like, true admiration and respect for her husband and what he wanted and what he was hoping, while being really fair about his flaws. I mean, one of the stories that's uncovered, there's so many, as you say, slow reveals throughout the play. The reveal of what's happened in the past is a major dramatic device. You learn that the thing that stopped Chembe's father from coming to the mission and that probably turned him into the leader of this group that is trying to violently rebel for their freedom, is that they would bring these sort of petitions that they were going to take to the government, and they'd talk about them with Reverend Nielsen. And sometimes he'd help them, and sometimes he'd advise them. But what they brought to him was this idea that they should have Native Africans serving on the quote-unquote representative governments for this part of Africa. And he told them that they should not take it on, that they should go back home, that this is not something they should bring to the government. And that is what initially caused the rift. And then later, very late in the play, she is pretty frank about the fact that he did not want Chembe's mother to live, or for his half-brother Eric to live, because it represented this kind of moral wrong in his eyes. And so even though there were human lives at stake, the sort of his view of the sort of sin of the world outweighed that. And so she is that seen too much, right? She sees both sides.
Yeah, and I agree. The great irony is, of course, she doesn't. She's blind.
She's blind.
So yeah, it's
incredible.
It's great. It's great imagery there. But yeah, just to be sure that we touch on those slow reveals. There's so many of those that you get just piece by piece, slowly piecing together, and each time you get a revelation of something new, it's these big wow moments. I think of the revelations, certainly the revelation of Eric's story, the revelation that Peter, who we've seen throughout the whole play, is kind of a different character than we thought that he was, that he's leading this sort of council. You have this great use of the word Bwana, which essentially means lord or boss or something along those lines. It's sort of a term of respect that is reversed throughout the play, that Peter says quite often. When Chembe throws it out, it has a different sort of meaning and tone to it. So yeah, there's all of these moments where you're slowly piecing together what's going on. The woman / warrior / spirit as well that kind of emerges throughout the play, both to Chembe and to the audience, is another that like kind of slow piecing together what's going on. What the true meaning of the drums are is slowly revealed. There's just so many of these things to discover as you sit with these characters for longer.
And who Eric's father is, of course, throughout the play. I want to bring our attention, too, to the just incredible use of imagery throughout the play. There is this kind of spiritual representative figure of the woman who opens the play and throughout acts as this sort of encouragement of Chembe to take up the spear. The spear becomes a physical representation of the violence that he may be asked to do in fighting for the freedom of his nation. And he rejects the spear all throughout the play that the woman is trying to get him to take. And then in that incredible confrontation with his brother, brother when he's trying to stop him from turning Peter in. It is an actual spear that he has held in his hands, and his brother puts the spear up to his breast and says, "Do it then. Take up," and so the metaphorical spear throughout the play becomes a physical, tangible, literal item of violence that he's not just going to have to use against anybody, but his own brother is going to be the first thing. I mean, crafting that kind of physical symbolism is it's just only possible if you have that level of genius. I mean, it's incredible.
It really is the degree to which like almost any prop matters in this play.
I know.
any negotiation, anytime, and then also like any time a character shows up, there is an attempt to sort of understand something about them. Even Major Rice, who we come down fully against. By the end of the play,
yeah.
Even from like the playwright's perspective, the scene where he shows up knowing that Peter is who Peter is just again like just a scene that is based on knowledge and tension based on that knowledge.
And it's just another example of not any easy way out, right? Because the white settlers refer to the group as the terrorists. We will call them the rebels or the freedom fighters or the whatever. It's not that they have been murdering military soldiers, for example, or trying to claim resources. They probably are also doing those things. But the major turning point at the beginning of the play that starts the action towards militarism is that they murdered a family. Children and all. And so Major Rice has been given this, you have to stop this group from murdering families. And so while he's not a very sympathetic character, there's not an easy way out to go, well, you shouldn't have to take those measures. I mean, it's a military base. What are you going to do? They're fighting. They're murdering families. And so he's given the job, stop them from murdering families. And that is not in any way defense of him or his actions, but just a way to show how Lorraine Hansberry murkies the waters. She makes everything as hard and complicated for these characters to figure their way out of, and for us to figure our way into understanding where our sense of the world is supposed to align.
And it's such a great the use of the three brothers to say what you just described. The kind is like to say out loud what you just described. Eric, there's this perfect scene in the second act where Eric is going to war. He's been recruited. He's got the spear. He's got the shield. He's going to war. Chembe shows up, takes the spear from him, and says, "You're not going to war." And there's going to be another way. I hate this as much as you do, but you're not going to war. And then Abios shows up and says, "You're not going to war, and I'm going to go tell Major Price about all this stuff that I now know." So Chembe has to be the middle person. And try to decide which way we're gonna go in this, and this is the scene where he has the spear and all that. So it's just this perfect scene of having Eric trying to push for war, Abios trying to push for some sort of state-based solution, slow, not war option, and Chembe in the middle trying to keep both of them from doing what they want to do, find another way, having to decide in the end.
The three brothers are just masterfully crafted characters for their particular alignments. And again, it's just taking something and complicating it with human reality. So you have a brother who represents the sort of I'm now going to be a Catholic priest. I've embraced the education and the medical and all this stuff that the settlers, the colonists have brought to my country. You have that brother, but he stayed in Africa the whole time because by contrast, you have Chembe, who is he comes home and there's this their first interaction. I'm not doing a great job of describing this, so let me just concretize it with their first interaction. Their first interaction as brothers, they have this argument about the sort of rituals, the ceremonial rituals of the funeral. Chembe, who is coming from Europe, he claims not to believe any of this. He's been living in Europe and America, but he comes home for the funeral and he dresses up in African religious ceremonial garb for the funeral. And this is where the first confrontation with his brother happens. His brother is dressed as a Catholic priest in training with a cross. And so you have these two different strong, incredibly powerful stage images, right? One brother dressed in African ceremonial religious garb, one brother dressed in a Catholic cassock and cross, right? And crucifix. And so they're symbols, right? Oh, this is just didactic. It's just putting these symbols and ideas in competition with each other. So say the negative reviews. But then you look at the brothers a little bit. One brother is coming from Europe and America, literally left Africa to go live in Europe and America. Yeah. He's the one dressed in African religious ceremonial garb. One brother says, I stayed. I'm more African than you. I've been here. I didn't run off to Europe, but he's the one dressed in the Catholic cassock and crucifix. So you just trouble the water a little bit more. And then their younger brother, the one that wants to pick up the spear and fight off the colonists, is half white. No easy answers. Lorraine Hansberry has a gift for taking something that looks concrete and understandable and then just troubling the waters.
Yeah.
Just muddying it. Just throwing in complications and beautiful human mystery to it all.
Yeah. Not only troubling the waters, but then also describing all of the the reefs and shoals underneath the water as well that has become troubled. It just feels like anytime that you oh yeah, this is complicated. Oh, it's way more complicated than that.
Way more. Because for example, the one of the other motifs that is bandied about in the Morris and Chembe conversations, which they're probably the picture perfect part of the play, or that's not really what I mean, but they're kind of the centerpiece of the play to me, are these confrontations between Morris and Chembe.
They're repetitious, they happen over and over. Yeah.
And the thing that they constantly come back to is Morris saying, well, you just hate white people. And it's I mean, that's not a totally ununderstandable point of view if you're Chembe.
Yep.
But Chembe over and over says, no, you don't get it.
Right.
I don't even care enough to hate you. You want me to feel these strong emotions because then you can understand me and categorize me. So again, it's just taking these this is a commonly held sort of belief or view or stereotype or whatever, and Lorraine Hansberry pulls back the curtain and says, this is just what you think about a group of people you know nothing about.
Yep. There's so many reveals like that. There's so many other there's other characters in this that we could focus on. But this is, alas, nearing the end, really the end of our time for this particular show. What an impactful show. I saw the kind of trailers for which is all that remain of the National Theater's at home edition of this play. What a impactful show. Hope I get to see it someday, both in person. Wouldn't mind also finding where that National Theater one is, if anyone has the info on that. What a cool show to see.
I agree. Because this play is so rarely produced, it's going to be hard for you to find a live production out there near you. If you do, let us know. I may travel for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, seriously. So what I want to really encourage you to do, maybe even more than other episodes, read this play. It's at your local library. It's Lorraine Hansberry. She's an American great. You can get it at your library. I got it at my library. Maybe you can't. It's on Amazon. You can find it. Get a copy. Read this play. It's so powerful. And the characters in this play say things that need to be said from all sides. And that's Lorraine Hansberry's gift. She's a friend to everyone and hater of no one. Everybody gets their fair shake in this play. And the stuff that's said needs to be said. And so I echo Julius Lester in saying, we miss a voice like Lorraine Hansberry. To put on paper and then eventually on stage, although after the end of her life, these incredibly powerful things to say, you can't miss it. Read this play. Really, really, please read this play.
Yeah, definitely. Check it out. We'll link to whatever we can below here for you to find things about this play. And when you do, we'd love to keep chatting about it. We'd love to keep extending the conversation out to all of you. You can find us on all the social medias. At No Script Podcast is the username across them, or at least on the ones that we're on. You can find us on Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Hit us up on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about LeBlanc with you.
We'll be back next week at the beginning of our themed month, mini month, for 10-minute plays coming your way. Till then, if you've liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please pass this on to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes theater, conversations about writing, hearing two nerds just rave like lunatics about how good a play is. That's us. Send them our way. They can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, all the places where you find your podcasts. You can also like the Facebook page, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish. Until next week, when we're back with our themed month.
I'm Jackson, and that's Jacob. Thanks for listening to No Script, the podcast.